You're listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast. Hey there, my name is Kevin, and on this edition of the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast, we're going to continue with the topic of video and using video to promote your music. On our last interview podcast, episode 10, you heard from a band called Moving Rushmore who saw a dramatic impact to their fan base just from the vidcast or video podcast that they released for free through iTunes. This time around, you're going to hear from Jen Scaturro and how she used a couple homemade music videos to really pump up the sales of her EP. Now, since the beginning of the internet age, it was obvious to everyone that the web would forever change the way artists and bands communicate with their fans. But what wasn't certain was if an artist could promote their music and create a fan base just by using the internet. And when I say by just using the internet, I'm not talking about a typical band who's out playing shows and their album is only available for purchase online, whether it be CD or digital downloads. I'm talking about an artist who doesn't play shows, has a great record they've recorded, and only promotes that record by using the web. In the last year or so, it seems like we've turned a corner, and the idea of only promoting something online has become more of a real possibility. That's where Jen comes in. Her I Am Jen project had been available online for a long time without any real sales momentum. But shortly after she released a homemade stop-motion video that featured her song Blowing My Mind, her sales began to pick up, and eventually they snowballed into hundreds of CD and download sales. As you listen to the interview, you'll catch on pretty quick that Jen is the epitome of a do-it-yourself artist. She does everything herself. And I hope that you find some inspiration in hearing the story of her music and the making of her videos. So let's get to that interview.
Is it possible to believe what I'm seeing? If it's possible, then I think I just met an angel. Am I dreaming, or are you looking for me? Is this possible? I've been looking for you too. At the same time.
Well, Jen, thanks for being on the podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as an artist? It sounds like you've been playing music for a long time.
Yeah, as a musician, I've been playing instruments my whole life. I would say, not to give too much of my age away, but at least 30 years. I started when I was really young. So it took me a while to really come to songwriting. I was really playing a lot, growing up in different situations in bands and at church and things like that. But once I moved to New York about 10 years ago, I took a position at a music house as an assistant engineer. And from there, the company, being that they focused on writing music for advertising, just sort of being around it and, wanting to get involved, I was able to move up to becoming a staff writer for them. And I think from there, just doing 30-second, 60-second spots and having the challenge a lot of the time to, have to sound like popular groups, it just sort of led me into kind of turning a little bit inward and saying, well, what would my own ideas be? So I started writing more instrumental music and learning more about scoring for films and some other projects they did there. And I guess, just building up my own studio at home, it just led to me really coming up with my first I Am Jen songs. There were, I would say, along the way, a few trials at writing pop music and sort of modern stuff, but it really didn't all come together until probably about 4 years ago.
Going back just a little bit, when you said a music house, what exactly did that company do, and what was your role there?
Well, I guess, I don't know if this is now an old term, but that was, about 5 or 6 years ago. The music house, from what it was known then, was basically a company. It could be made up of one person, or I worked at a small company that was 5 people, or sometimes these companies can be as large as, 15 or more. And basically their job is to sort of crank out music mostly for advertising, but also television and film projects. It sort of depends on, the specialty of the writers that work at that company. And most of the companies have composing rooms and, small recording studios. My role was really, like I said, I was hired as an assistant engineer. So generally the structure is, there's always an engineer in-house who's, taking care of all of the tracking needs and sometimes even mixing spots and sort of finishing things up while composers are working on other things. So, I started assisting that person, and it led to me becoming the chief engineer. And then, it's just not uncommon to share jobs in that I was the chief engineer, but also writing. It was sort of like once my day responsibilities of being the engineer were over, sure, if I wanted to stay up all night and write a 30-second ad for, some product, I could certainly do that, as long as by 9 o'clock I was ready to roll.
Yeah. Is that a pretty high-pressure job, having to come up with music for commercials and things like that?
I would say so, in that, the deadlines can be really fast, and there are different levels of work. Sometimes your company is awarded a job, which just means you're not competing with anybody, and then, the pressure can be off a little bit, but most of the time you're competing with other music houses, and you have no idea what they're doing or how many houses there could be. And then other times you're doing a pitch, which is before the campaign even exists, and you're usually working for nothing, and it's kind of give us 4 pieces of music in 12 hours. So I don't know about pressure, but it's the real challenge is making the clients happy. And there's a lot of revisions and interesting comments to try to change music to satisfy, different people.
Yeah. So what led into the I Am Jen project?
Well, it's kind of funny because I really had quite a lot of equipment. Just for getting started in a project studio, I must have had a handful of synths and a drum machine and a Mac. And I was home messing around with Pro Tools, and I was still making a lot of instrumental tracks then, and I had left the music house to go freelance, and I was working for a record producer who needed a programmer to flesh out his demos for his publisher. So he would have to submit, songs to his publisher, but they needed to be produced up. So he would sort of do guitar vocal versions of his songs and hand them over to me and say, let's kind of push it in this certain pop sound direction. So when I was working on that kind of stuff, I found that my niche was that I was really good at processing sounds in Pro Tools and sort of just playing with the plugins and just being really creative. It really kind of, to a certain point, I got comfortable with this producer that I could really experiment and just kind of throw a bunch of ideas out. And it just got me into this really experimental mode. And I ended up doing a lot of vocal processing kind of turning little snippets, sometimes, most of the time actually, vocal outtakes. This producer would, give me like a scratch vocal. And so it would be, if it was a song intended for a female pop star or something, he would, get a session singer in or somebody to sing it. And so sometimes I would just find, I don't know, just something interesting or melodic and almost sort of turn it into an instrumental part. Mm-hmm. So in doing that, on the job, that was a fun thing. And then I started to realize, like, well, I'd like to practice this when I'm not on the job so that maybe I can start to kind of gain some control over some of these experiments. Mm-hmm. And so, I was listening to one of my instrumental tracks and I thought, well, I need a vocal to mess with. So I started to think, well, who could I have over of my friends that could do something? And I just thought, it was kind of late, and I was like, well, why don't I just sing something for now, and then I can mess around with it. I mean, nobody's going to hear it. I really didn't consider myself a singer at all, was not comfortable with my singing voice. So I just, sang a few words, and I decided that, well, let me try this experiment of cutting up each word individually. I sang like 6 takes of the same kind of random sentence and cut them up. And as it turns out, that turned into the song on my Broken EP called Something. Mm-hmm. So it actually, I guess something about putting that together, it started to seem like a pleasing sound to me. It wasn't creeping me out like my vocal used to. Mm-hmm. So, I just kind of stuck, and it became a song, so I kept it.
Well, that's cool. What you mentioned that you were using Pro Tools. Is that what you're still using in your studio? You mentioned in an email to me that your studio is your apartment. So
yes.
I was just curious at what you're using there to record.
Yeah, I'm still using Pro Tools, and it's funny. I'm still on a pretty old LE system for my main engine, but I do have a more modern system on another machine. But yeah, I really enjoy using Pro Tools. I think it's the easiest tool for me.
How would you describe the music that you're writing for the I Am Jen project?
Well, I mean, I guess you can, definitely categorize the sound of at least what's been released so far as electronic. There's definitely a pop element to it. At times there might be slight moments where it's a little bit, I don't want to, experimental is a weird word to use, but it's just a little, trying to be a little non-traditional, or, mm-hmm. If I happen to come up with some sound that I like, that's, I don't know, just a little offbeat, that's fine, that fits in with it in my mind. But I don't know that I'm that conscious about what it is.
Do you have some sort of go-to synth or sound that you normally gravitate to when you're writing and just kind of start building off of?
At this point, I don't really go to the same thing. I mean, I pretty much, I don't know, it's so hard to say. It's almost like so far each song has been like an individual process. Uh-huh. I guess in the later songs, I've been getting more in the habit of sitting with either a guitar or a piano and really focusing on the song. I think earlier on it was more about taking a track or an idea that had already existed and kind of modifying it because I'm bringing in a lyric or a voice which was not kind of part of the original plan of whatever that sounded like.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
But, it's hard to say. I mean, certain songs I sit down to just mess around with, and then whatever synth sound was up, becomes part of the identity of that song.
Do you have like just a giant number of synths, or do you just have a couple that...
I don't have that many, but I have my favorites. Everything... I like everything red. So I have the Nord 2, the Nord 3. I'm kidding about the red thing. I actually have a blue one too, the Dave Smith Evolver that just came out, I guess probably in the last year or so.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that keyboard, and the Clavia stuff is just right up my alley. I do have an SE I use that, that's pretty much all the bass sounds that I make are coming from that. And I have a favorite drum machine, which is by Electron, called the Machine Drum. So I use that quite a lot.
That's cool. So are you now that you've got this music thing that you're working on for yourself, are you playing gigs around New York, or are you doing anything live? Not
yet for the I Am Jen stuff. I'm still kind of trying to figure out how I want to do that. I did a few sort of practice acoustic gigs, I don't know, maybe over a year ago, and I wasn't that happy with doing, the kind of full electronic thing, in an acoustic kind of remix. So, that's still kind of in the works, but if it does come to the, stage, it'll be probably at least a trio, maybe more, kind of trying to bring some more of that electronic sound in a live setting.
Well, cool. Well, let's move into talking about the video that you did, and it seemed like it paid off pretty well. First of all, you made a video for, the song was Blowing My Mind, correct?
Right.
And before that, your I Am Jen project had been out for a year or so?
A couple of years, yeah.
And so what was the idea behind doing the video? It seems like after you put that on YouTube, you're suddenly selling a lot of CDs. And I just was curious, since previous podcast we were talking about doing a vidcast, I'm curious on how just making this simple video has totally affected your sales.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, it was sort of during the summer, there were two videos that went up. The first one was Blowing My Mind, which sort of, it happened in that I've been kind of messing around with video for a long time. I was on and off probably almost my whole life, but never really kind of made a specific film or anything longer than a minute of just playing around with different techniques. Once I wrote the song Blowing My Mind, I sort of instantly had this narrative story and picture of how the whole song would look. And I would say that's pretty close to what the video for Blowing My Mind ended up becoming. So it was seeing the whole thing as like a 4-minute thing in my mind. I just thought, wow, like if I can just kind of get this all out, this would be a good first real project kind of accomplishment. So it just sort of came out of a bit of, I feel like doing this and I have the idea, and I had a decent digital camera and some software that was really cheap or free, I can't remember, and the two figures that are kind of starring in the film were just these two characters that I had put together a few months earlier, just again, like, I don't know, just for fun. I had these parts laying around and stuck them together, and that's what they were.
And it's all stop motion, correct?
It is. It's a combination at times of live action and, mostly stop motion, and it's pretty, I want to say pretty bad stop motion. But, I purposefully went for, I don't know what the name of this, if this is anything, I don't know really what to call it, but just that I didn't go for, doing a million frames, because obviously stop motion can take a huge amount of production time. So I kind of consciously knew at the beginning that I wanted to shoot it in one weekend. Friday night to Sunday night was just all I had. So I just didn't do like a million frames, to make the characters moving incredibly smoothly. And you can definitely see that there's a choppiness in the video. Were you using just a regular digital video camera? Yeah, I have, it's a Pentax camera that I picked up for regular digital photo stuff a couple years ago. Yeah, so I used that, and it just happens to be a camera that has a video out on it that, just plugged right into my Mac. It sort of just fell into place, like I had everything I needed, kind of thing.
So it was actually like an actual regular digital photo camera.
Yeah, I mean,
it wasn't a video camera.
The way it's set up is just, I'm really just using the lens, and the computer is recording the frames.
Oh, okay. So it took you a weekend to do that. How long ago was it that you made the video?
Well, I did this weekend shoot. I think it might have been over a year ago. It was during the summer of '06, which ended up being about 90% of the footage. I sort of shot the thing and then kind of rough edited together the following weekend, and then it just sat for a long time because I just knew it got difficult. And so,
yeah.
And I got busy, and so it just kind of sat off to the side until I got, the juice up to do what I needed to do to get over the hump and finish it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that was realizing, probably when I put the first kind of rough together, realizing that I was about, 30 seconds short on footage. So I knew I was not going to set up again because it pretty much took over my whole apartment with lighting and and things like that. So
you mentioned lighting. Was it just lighting like household lighting you used, or did you have some sort of video lights that you got?
It was mostly household lighting, just a lot of, I guess, it's sort of weird. Like, I know I have a couple of fluorescent lamps that I remember getting at a thrift shop, like, a long time ago. So it's like I pulled those out for the first time and plugged those in, and everything was just boiling hot. So it must have been like 5 lights, shining it. And I really know nothing about lighting. Mm-hmm. I'm sure professionals who see 5 seconds of the video can see that too. And I just sort of pointed the things in every direction, and I just, sweated while I shot the frames. So.
Well, sometimes the charm in something is the fact that someone who wasn't a professional did it, because it looks totally different than everything else.
Yeah, it definitely has that quirky amateur thing going on, I think.
So when did you finally finish that up and put it up on the internet?
Well, in March, I think, is when I really kind of got over the hump, and I was doing the portions of it where I was pulling the frames into Photoshop, and there are a couple of sections where there were some blue screen things that I did, and also some drawing additional kind of animation on each frame. So it ended up taking another full 3 weeks to get it finished. And I don't remember the exact date, but I feel like sometime in the spring is when I just took that first leap, and I thought, okay, I'm putting this on YouTube and MySpace and all the major video hubs, and I'll just sort of find out like what it's like to have a video up and how all this stuff works.
Today, I learned something about myself.
So before we go on to the actual distribution of it, you mentioned that you were pulling each frame into Photoshop. So you took all basically the raw material, and then you were processing each frame in Photoshop to make the final.
Well, not each frame, but there would be sections. I'm trying to think of a particular scene. Well, there's a scene where the main character, who's actual, nobody probably knows this, but his name is P, the letter P. The other character is named Q. P is having a little flashback of P and Q on the couch watching a movie, and it's it's a colorized version of the Tacoma Bridge accident. So that bridge footage kind of shrinks down into a little memory or thought bubble above P's head. Mm-hmm. And this kind of transition where there's sort of this white drawn little cloud or thought bubble. All those frames were done in Photoshop. So it would be, little 5-second sections like that where I might pull, 50 frames into Photoshop and do something.
So with that bridge footage you're talking about, was that added in later in a video editing program?
Yeah, the whole thing was edited in Final Cut Express. And the frame grabbing, I don't know if I mentioned this, but this was done using Frame Thief.
Frame Thief, okay. Well, cool. So now you put it on YouTube and some other video outlets. Was it you just put it up there and said, let's see what happens? Or were you actually promoting it, or what was that process like?
Well, I thought I put it up and I just wanted to see what would happen. I wasn't really sure of how these sites work that well. I mean, it's kind of, up until that point, it was just kind of my impression. You put something up and like if a lot of people liked it, it got popular, which, to a certain degree is true, but there's still that rule of you have to show people that it's there.
Yeah.
So it sat there for a while, doing nothing, basically, because YouTube or MySpace or these kinds of sites have, tons of videos that get uploaded. So I started to look into in each site, is there some, obviously you go to the front page of these sites and you see featured videos. And I was wondering, well, how do these people get featured? So I just started to dig through some of the site maps and would end up finding some kind of contact email. And I basically just, politely asked, would you consider featuring this video?
Mm-hmm.
And for blowing my mind, several sites ended up featuring it. It ended up doing the best on MySpace, where it was like, one Saturday morning I woke up, and this was weeks after I had emailed all these companies asking if they would feature it. And I just had, I don't know, it's like 70 responses in my inbox at MySpace, which is, 69 more than normal. So, so I thought, something's up. And then that video ended up climbing over the week. It climbed up to like 130,000 hits.
So all you basically did was at MySpace, you just happened to find some real contact information and just emailed them.
Yeah, that was it. And what I learned also is that most sites don't get back to you and say, hey, we're going to do this. It really just kind of happened, without me knowing it was going to happen. So
from that point on, it seems like things started to take off for you a little bit as far as the EP starting to sell and get out there?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it got me thinking for sure that, like, being that this was rising in number on MySpace, I should probably figure out some way of, developing, I guess what I kind of in my mind call like a channel, being that if somebody watches the video and my goal is for them to either buy the CD or download it from iTunes or something, that I should make it really easy and obvious for them to do that. So, I started setting up, I had links on my MySpace page, but I really went over that whole process and made sure it was really simple.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say from blowing my mind that being that song, first of all, is something that's going to be out on the next release of mine. It was, I was getting a lot of requests for like, where can I get this? And so I realized quickly that I've got to have an answer for that, since a lot of people, I put this thing out, people were liking it, and then they couldn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a way, the learning part of this process was, that maybe you should, maybe do-it-yourselfers should expect, or prepare that something should happen, and then, be ready for it. Because otherwise, I think if you're looking to really sell records as opposed to just get everyone's attention, you need to have something pretty solid in place to please these people. Because it's hard when you say, well, it's not out, it's going to be out later this year. I think you kind of, you lose the momentum a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of do it yourself, that leads into the second video you did where you're showing the making of your whole packaging that you do yourself. And every time you sell out of CDs, you have to break out the stamps and make a whole bunch more.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, this was like a great idea that's like coming back to haunt me.
well, I have to say, I had contacted you about being on the podcast, and then when I was doing some more research about the videos you had done and came across that one, it really did build in some anticipation about, getting the package and knowing that it was something special that you had made personally. And I think the way you did the video, I thought was really cool with all the little facts and things that, people who are wondering, oh, how can I do that myself? You're basically telling them throughout the video as they see you make the packaging. So why don't you talk about the idea behind making that video and then how you did that video, because it seems like the process was different for that one.
Okay, yeah, it really was different. The way that I even really came up with, doing another video after blowing my mind was that, first of all, I enjoyed the real jump in exposure that happened with blowing my mind, but I knew that I couldn't shoot another big project like stop motion video, even though I have another song and another script, and that video will happen, and probably more like that because I really enjoyed doing it. But I guess I just sort of figured out, well, once the excitement died down after about 2 weeks, that I figured, well, there's got to be a way that I can do something still, with a high, a high creative, I don't want to say creative level, but just something that I felt like proud of a little bit, like artistically, that I could put out that wouldn't take, 2 months or so to do. So I was just really thinking about that idea for weeks, and because it was difficult to come up with something quick. And I started to remember that I get a lot of emails from people asking me where I get the supplies for my EPs. Most people that have purchased the EP are also musicians and songwriters, and people are curious, where these materials came from. So I would answer these emails with, go get this here, and this is how you do it. So I thought, well, why don't I just show that process? And I didn't even really think about putting those facts up until later. I just thought, well, I like sort of time-lapse stuff, so let me just set up the camera and just literally show exactly what I do, which is, sit at my kitchen table and lay out 9 CDs at once and stamp away. So, it was a little bit just kind of shooting from the hip. And I knew, like I said, the best sort of part about it was I knew I could shoot the whole thing pretty quickly, and sort of get it done and get it up.
Did you do that just with one camera?
I did, yeah. And I just, moved the camera every so often. And that week, actually, I had taken an old skateboard helmet and stuck a little flexible tripod on it and made a little helmet cam. So
I was wondering what you did for that, because I'm like, that's a helmet cam. And
yeah, again, like some of this, not like a helmet cam is like that original of an idea, but just having this kind of on my brain, I was really, really looking for like, what can I do that I would be happy with? And, anyway, so the helmet cam like came into play. And then I just, I remember I started at about 9 o'clock at night. It was sort of like I leapt up and I was like, okay, I'm going to just do this. And then by 3 o'clock in the morning, I had finished editing it. I threw the footage into Final Cut Express. And along the way, as I was editing, I figured like, oh, I should put in some facts about like where this stuff came from. And so just, kind of quickly put that stuff on. And then it was even, the afterthought was like, okay, well, I want to use video to, in a sense, get people to listen to the music. So, it's because it's not really a music video and it's not really an instructional video.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like, something interesting to look at and you'll be able to hear a tune.
Yeah.
So I picked the 4th song from the EP, What It Means to Be Human, and just cut the footage to that. And that seemed like the right vibe to me. And that was pretty much it. I mean, there was, not like a ton of pre-planning. I just sort of did it.
How did you do the time-lapse thing? Is that something that the camera does, or is that something that you dump all the footage into the computer and have that program do it?
It's a combination, actually. The camera has a bunch of time-lapse speeds. I can't even remember which one I put on there, but I set that to record in time-lapse. And then when I brought it into Final Cut Express, I made some adjustments to the speed of those clips, really just to make that footage, or that shot fit, for the time that I wanted it to appear on screen. And, after a while, it does get a little monotonous, even seeing a time-lapse of somebody's arm stamping a single letter on 9 pieces of cardboard. So, I was like, okay, let's speed it up already.
In real time, how long does it take you to do those 9 CDs?
Well, I'm getting a lot faster lately. It's funny, but it takes, I estimate it takes 5 minutes each one, like literally, like from the minute I might, I'll be like burning the CD and doing the stamping until it's like completely packaged and done. I think it's about 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I thought it was really cool. I was sitting there eating up the whole time, just reading where everything came from. And, I'm one of those guys that when I see somebody doing something cool, I want to know exactly how they did it. And that's why I started this podcast to begin with, So it's like when you had the image of the sticker there and told not just where you got the sticker made, but where the idea for the sticker came from. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really cool. And I thought, it was one of those things that more artists should do it just makes the whole package and just what you're doing have more of a story behind it. And I think artists have a hard time getting their story out there, and the ones that do are the ones that seem to be having a little more success.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess looking at it now in retrospect, it's a really perfect example of like how I do things, which is, somebody would be nuts to stamp a single letter across an EP like that, a single letter at a time. And, I tend to take a long time doing things. And so, I guess without realizing, that was a pretty good example of me right there.
Well, you mentioned that you've got another video in the works, or at least floating around in your head. What plans do you have for your music and as far as incorporating video with it in the future?
Well, I definitely like this idea of using video to get people to listen to music. I think as a new artist, it can be difficult to get people to listen to you. And for me, this is what seems to work. I guess there may be other techniques to get yourself into somebody's mind, or, just get them open to listening to something they haven't heard before. So I'm just looking to, I think this is just something that it's like one of the tools that I can use. So it's sort of just kind of exists in my mind as something I can do. I try to keep everything really coming from a place of real inspiration. Mm-hmm. So if I never make another video, I just feel like, well, that's okay with me, and like that's just sort of how it goes. Mm-hmm. But I do have my little bag of ideas. I have another song it's not actually going to be on the next release, but there's a song called Down Here, which I'd like to use more animation techniques, and I'm kind of stepping into more drawn animation. Mm-hmm. So I've bought some more software, and I've been playing around with that.
What is your next release going to be? A full-length album, or are you just sticking with the EP format?
Well, for now, it's going to be another 4-song EP. It's called Invisible, and it's coming out very soon. That's about all I can say. I don't have a specific date on it, but
it comes out when it comes out. That's when it comes out.
Yeah, it is. This I'm sort of the one that decides when that happens, and I tend not to make dates in the calendar for that kind of thing. But it's coming incredibly soon. Mm-hmm.
Well, I saw the little preview. You even made a preview video of it on your MySpace page, and the music that was on there sounded really nice. So.
Oh, thanks.
Well, cool. Well, you'll have to keep us posted when it comes out, and definitely if you have any other videos, you need to make sure we know about it. And do you have any advice for any artists out there that are trying to want to incorporate video into what they're doing and just don't know how to get started, or any pointers?
Yeah, I guess, well, I think there's sort of two choices. If you if you have a camera and you just don't know what to do, I just say go and experiment. And if that's not working, or you don't have a camera, you've got to find somebody that does and is willing to experiment with you. But I think the main thread that really works, because anyone can just kind of pick up a camera and shoot something and stick a song on it or make a music video. But the thing that seems to really grab people is that, unspoken sort of emotional connection. And I think that some real integrity it plays a part in that. So I always look at this kind of thing and music, music video, any kind of artistic endeavor as really kind of reaching for the truth somewhere, whether it's in you or in an event that you're writing about or experiencing. So my best advice is always to just, people say be yourself, or I just say go for the truth and just sort of let it happen. And I guess that's it. That's what I try to do for myself. So that's about the only advice I can give.
Well, cool. Well, thanks for being on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me.
At the same time. At the same time.
Well, sadly, that's going to bring us to the end of this edition of the DIY Music Podcast. But before we go, I wanted to make sure you had a couple links where you could go and check out Jen's videos. Since we are talking about videos, it would be nice to see them. First of all, you can go to her website, which is iamjen.com. You'll have access to her videos and all sorts of other information about her. Plus, you can buy some of her music there. Also, we'll have her videos posted on the podcast website, which is cdbabypodcast.com, so you can go there and check out the videos as well. And finally, as always, we'd love to get your feedback, comments, and questions, so feel free to email us at info@cdbabypodcast.com.
It took a shock to open my eyes. A bomb went off, blowing my mind. An empty box said everything are bare and loved. I am crying. You know the way I do my hair. I like my tea. It's so unfair now that it's clear to me.
been listening to the CD Baby DIY Music Podcast, broadcasting from Portland, Oregon, USA.